Chapter 5. A New Philosophy. By 16, Kyle's presence filled the dead spire like a quiet storm. He no longer walked with the hesitance of a student. His footsteps were measured, his cloak deliberate in its flow, his voice calm but edged with weight. When he entered a room, the air itself seemed to hush, less out of reverence and more out of wariness. Those who survived long enough to speak of him did so only in whispers. Some called him the blade that listens. Others simply didn't speak of him at all. He had become the creature the pit lords of Vuren had feared he might. But something deeper had taken root in him, an awareness that strength alone was hollow without shape. Kyle's training had long since surpassed the curriculum of Sith doctrine. Malvex had stopped assigning drills. There were no more forced meditations, no more chambers of pain. Instead, Kyel chose his own crucibles. He spent hours in the oldest halls of the spire, places even the acolytes feared to tread. Rooms where stone tablets bore symbols so ancient they predated language. He studied holocrons not just from Sith lords, but from Jedi prisoners, fallen guardians, even neutral scholars cast out by both orders for refusing to kneel. There, in the dust and silence, Kyle began to understand something neither his master nor his enemies had shown him. The Force was not allegiance. It was possibility. He read the Jedi Code by candlelight. There is no emotion. There is peace. He repeated it, felt its truth, then countered it. Peace without emotion is apathy. He read the Sith Code. Through passion, I gain strength. He repeated it, knew its seduction, then challenged it. Passion without principle is rot. Kyle began to write his own axioms, not on holocrons, but on the walls of the deepest vaults, etched with a blade. Each line carved with intent. Balance is not neutrality. It is discipline in motion. Power is not the goal. Understanding is. I am not the weapon. I am the one who decides where it is aimed. He recited them in meditations that lasted days. He began dreaming of stars, not battles, but paths, choices, echoes of places he had never seen, yet felt drawn to. Malvex noticed the change. At first, he thought it was arrogance, that the boy he had forged in fire was now letting his blade rust in philosophy. But he watched, and he saw something else. When Kyle dueled, he struck with restraint. Not weakness, precision. He anticipated 5 moves ahead, choosing not the swiftest kill, but the cleanest path to control. He showed mercy only when it served him, ruthlessness only when necessary. He was not following a code. He was writing one. The moment that changed everything came after a long mission to the war-shattered rim world of Dagon's Reach. Kyle returned with the saber of a rogue Sith alchemist. The man had tried to turn living kyber crystals into sentient weapons. He had begged Kyle for mercy, offered forbidden knowledge, claimed he could teach Kyle what Malvex never would. Kyle's reply had been a silent nod. The saber he returned with still hummed faintly when he dropped it at Malvex's feet. Malvex studied the weapon, then the boy. He begged, "Yes." "And you killed him." "Yes." "Why?" Kyle stared evenly at him. "Because he had already stopped being useful." Malvex said nothing, but Kyle didn't stop. "He wasn't wrong. You won't teach me everything." "I've taught you enough." "No," Kyle said. "You taught me to endure, to fight, to win, but not to understand." Malvex's voice dropped. "You're not here to understand. You're here to become." "I already am," Kyle said quietly. "Just not what you think." That night, Malvex stood at the top of the spire, alone beneath the ash-flecked sky. He remembered when he first found Kyel, half-starved, eyes like obsidian, defiant even when broken. He had seen potential, power, the raw clay of something magnificent. But now the boy had shaped himself. Not Sith, not Jedi, something else, something dangerous. And Malvex hated the part of himself that felt pride. He would never say it. He couldn't afford to. But in the quiet, he whispered into the Force, "He will surpass me." And the Force whispered back, "He already has." The throne room of the Dead Spire had never felt so empty. Kyel stood at the base of the dais. Malvex sat atop his stone throne, the ancient carvings behind him glowing with faint red runes. A single torch burned in the chamber's corner, casting long broken shadows across the obsidian floor. Neither had spoken in over a minute. Finally, Kyel broke the silence. "I've come to ask you something you've never answered." Malvex raised an eyebrow. "You've asked many things I've never answered. Because you don't want to." Malvex leaned forward slightly. "You mistake silence for fear, Kyel. Be careful with that." "I mistake nothing. Not anymore." Something shifted in Malvex's face, barely perceptible. A flicker of thought, maybe pride, maybe caution. "You trained me to wield pain," Kyel continued. "But you never explained why your own is so well hidden, why you cling to strength like it's the only answer." "Because it is," Malvex replied instantly. Kyel tilted his head. "Is it? Or is that what you told yourself the day your master abandoned you, or the day you buried your name under this mask of power?" Malvex stood. The Force rippled. But Kyel didn't flinch. "You think you've grown beyond the Sith," Malvex said, voice low. "You think your curiosity is wisdom, but it's rebellion, dressed in robes you stitched together from dead men's teachings." "I think rebellion is the first act of clarity," Kyel replied. "And I think clinging to absolutes is just fear disguised as discipline." Malvex descended the steps. His boots echoed in the quiet. "I made you," he said. "No," Kyel whispered. "You broke me. I made myself." They stood face to face now. "You are Sith," Malvex said. "I was," Kyel answered. "Now, I am simply Kyel. You stand alone. I stand in balance. And you think that will save you?" "I don't want to be saved. I want to choose." Malvex studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched, not with tension, but with weight. Then he turned his back. "There will come a day," he said quietly, "when you'll beg for the simplicity of the blade, when philosophy won't matter, only will." Kyle's voice followed him. "I don't fear that day, because when it comes, I won't reach for a creed. I'll reach for the truth inside me, and that will be enough." Malvex paused at the top step. He didn't look back. But for the first time in his life, he felt something stir deep within him. Not anger, not pride, but sorrow, because Kyel was no longer his. And somewhere inside, he had always known. He never truly was. Malachor did not sleep, but it shifted. Kyel felt it the moment he woke. The air was heavier. The Force around him prickled with intent. Something was coming, an echo, a shape behind the veil. The cold stone floor of his chamber held a stillness too deep to ignore. Even the red glow of the spire's pulse fires flickered with unease. By the time the summons reached him, delivered without words by silent acolyte messengers, Kyel was already dressed, lightsaber clipped at his side, cloak trailing behind him like the edge of a storm. They led him to the northern Colosseum, a broken, sand-blown circle carved into Malachor's cliffside, a place where apprentices were either elevated to power or left to rot beneath crumbling statues. It was a ruin of ancient grandeur, Shattered pillars, dust-choked stone seats, bloodstains ground into the floor by centuries of ritual combat. Malvex stood at the highest tier of the arena, arms crossed, robes unmoving despite the wind. His face was shrouded beneath his hood, but his presence in the force loomed over the chamber like a predator. In the pit below, two figures waited. Both were Sith, rogue acolytes, Varric and Lisa. Their faces were half obscured behind cracked masks, their postures coiled and unstable. Their armor was scorched, dented, streaked with dark grime. Kyel recognized them faintly from earlier years, apprentices once praised for raw power and vicious promise. But ambition had curdled into rebellion. They had tried to take control of a vault wing, nearly killed 3 younger students, and vanished into the tunnels below. They had not been seen since. Until now. Malvex's voice rang out. They betrayed the Order. They sought power without wisdom, but they are strong. Kyel didn't respond. Malvex continued, his voice deeper now, laced with the weight of unspoken challenge. This is your trial. You claim to follow your own path. Let's see if it holds when tested by the broken echoes of what you might have become. He gestured. Begin. They didn't wait. Varric and Lisa sprang forward in unison, not allies but animals cornered together. Varric charged from the right with a brutal upward cleave, wielding his heavy gem, so saber like a warhammer. Lisa spun low, agile and sharp, her blade flickering with erratic feints meant to confuse and disorient. Kyel didn't ignite his saber. He stepped aside. Varric's strike missed by inches, crashing into a pillar with a deafening crack. The stone exploded in a burst of dust. Kyel turned with the momentum, finally igniting his blade, its signature twin glow flaring, blue at the base, red at the tip. The arena was instantly bathed in that strange, shifting light. He caught Lysa's thrust with the flat of his blade, redirected it into the ground, and spun past her. With a flick of the force, he sent her sliding backward. She recovered fast. The two regrouped, circling. Kyel stepped forward. This time he pressed the assault. He weaved between Varric's strikes, slicing shallow wounds into the man's forearm, his side, his shoulder, deliberate, non-lethal cuts. He baited Lisa into overextending, then swept her legs from beneath her. She landed with a grunt, sand choking her cry. Varric roared and leapt forward. Their sabers clashed, lighting the dusk-stained arena with crackling fury. Kyel held the lock, then pivoted, and struck Varric in the throat with his elbow, hard. The larger man collapsed, gasping for breath, hands clawing at his crushed windpipe. Kyel turned. Lysa was already up. She charged, screaming. He raised a hand. The force caught her saber mid-swing. It froze inches from his face. Her scream cut off. She stared at him, paralyzed. He stepped forward, pushed her back with pure pressure. Her feet scraped against the ground until her back slammed into the far wall. Her saber hand trembled, but she didn't drop it. He could have ended it. Instead, he deactivated his blade. Do it, she spat. End it. Prove your strength. Kyel shook his head. No. You're weak. No, he said, quieter. I'm free. Lysa's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with confusion. Then, something closer to shame. Above, Malvex stood silent. He did not speak as Kyel walked to Varric's side, checked his pulse, ensured he would survive. He said nothing as Kyel offered Lysa a hand, and she took it. He didn't move as Kyel walked from the arena without looking back. But in that silence, something had shifted. A law unspoken, a boundary broken. A lesson returned to the teacher. Because Kyel had passed a trial no Sith had dared to give. Mercy without compromise, power without destruction. And Malvex knew. His student had outgrown him, and worse still, he had forgiven him for it. The forge chamber was silent. Not the silence of emptiness, but the still, focused quiet that came just before transformation. It lay deep beneath the dead spire, buried beneath stone strata carved by Sith centuries before Malvex had drawn breath. Few knew the forge even existed. Fewer still dared to light it. The entrance was carved from a single slab of obsidian, its frame etched with forgotten runes that pulsed softly as Kyel entered. Cold mist hugged the floor. Overhead, vents designed to channel volcanic heat exhaled shallow, rhythmic gusts like the breath of a slumbering giant. The walls bore soot scars from weapons long since destroyed, some in rage, others in revelation. Kyel had discovered the chamber in silence, guided not by maps or memory, but by the pull of something wordless in the Force. He stepped through the threshold and lit the fires himself. No ceremony, no audience, no master, only intention. The components were laid out with care, each piece chosen not for elegance, but for memory. A reinforced alloy hilt, salvaged from the scorched armor plating of a fallen warrior on Dagon's Reach, its weight a reminder of necessary endings. A finely etched grip, wrapped in dark woven leather, cut from the robes of a Jedi exile who had died whispering that peace without action was complicity. A focusing lens taken from a scavenged staff once wielded by a Night Sister. Internal wiring, gathered over years, repurposed from broken weapons, security panels, crashed transports, fragments of a life lived on edges. But the heart of the weapon, the crystal, was something else entirely. It was not bled. He had not torn it from the Force in anger. It had come to him. Found in a collapsed temple on an unnamed moon during a supply raid, the crystal had called to Kyel while others fled. Beneath fractured stone, in a chamber suffocated by dust, it pulsed faintly. Dim, not from lack of power, but from restraint. As though it waited for someone who could understand what power without clarity would destroy. Now, it hovered before him, cradled in a levitation field. A modest ember of muted red light, its core pulsing faintly with silver-blue veins. Not the raw crimson of the Sith, not the cool blue of the Jedi, but something in between. It was the color of tempered fire, heat mastered, not unleashed. A blade not of vengeance, but of decision, of will sharpened into purpose. Kyel placed a hand over the crystal. It warmed gently, not in welcome, in recognition. He saw visions, not of conquest, but of choice. He saw his sister, standing between him and fire. He saw Tarsa, her laughter echoing through the pits before it was stolen. He saw Malvex perched high atop the spire, like a figure already becoming legend, his silhouette dark and watching, but no longer defining. And he saw himself, not the weapon, not the heir, the architect. He did not cry. He breathed and began. The forging took 3 days. Each part was assembled with obsessive precision. The emitter was custom cut, designed to narrow the blade into a sleek, refined shaft, not for overwhelming force, but for balance. The internal circuits were stabilized with micro-vibration dampeners, an old technique once used by Jedi artisans to center the crystal's pulse. He worked without rest, without error. Every motion was deliberate, every decision owned. On the 3rd night, as the final seals locked and the hilt settled into silence, Kyel stood in the center of the forge. Alone. He ignited the blade. It emerged in silence. A long, narrow beam of subdued red, its heart pulsing softly with silver, a breath of light caught behind fire. It did not scream like Sith sabers. It sang, a low, harmonic hum, steady and resonant. It hummed not with hatred, but with clarity. He stepped into motion, Makashi, elegant and deliberate, into Soresu, centered, defensive, with bursts of Juyo, unpredictable and sharp. Each transition smooth, each movement chosen, not reflexive. The blade flowed as an extension of mind and memory, not just instinct. It did not command him. It followed. He ended with a slow flourish, lowering the blade until it hovered just above the floor. He deactivated it. Silence returned. This was not a Sith weapon, not a Jedi's. This was his. And in that moment, Kyel understood. He was not wielding the Force. He was partnering with it, not to conquer, but to shape, to build something both orders had forgotten. Direction. When next he stood before Malvex, saber at his side, the Elder Master said nothing. But his gaze lingered on the weapon longer than Kyel had ever seen, not in judgment, but in awe and fear. Because for the first time since Kyel had entered his life, Malvex did not see a student. He saw a rival. The days that followed the forging of Kyle's new saber passed in silence, but not in stillness. Malvex made no mention of the weapon, nor of the trial Kyel had passed against the rogue acolytes. He issued no commands, offered no praise, and yet something had changed between them. It was not spoken aloud. The Sith had no words for affection, no rituals for kinship. But it was there, in the way Malvex paused longer before dismissing him, in the way Kyel spoke with less formality and more curiosity, in the hours they spent in the spire's high chamber, seated across from each other with texts and holocrons between them, not as master and apprentice, but as thinkers, challenging one another. In long silences where they both stared into the fire, saying nothing, yet understanding more than words could hold. Once, during a shared meal, the first Kyel could ever remember, Malvex had simply said, "You don't need to defeat me." Kyel had looked at him, wary. "You taught me that I'd have to. I taught you to survive, but you already surpassed that." Their eyes met across the firelight. No more was said, but it was understood. Kyel had become more than a student, and Malvex, for all his masks and power, had become something more than a teacher. In all but name. They were father and son. There were other moments, too. Moments when Malvex would observe Kyel during meditation, then quietly sit beside him without disrupting the flow. When he offered Kyel access to holocrons, sealed even from the inner acolytes. When he passed along ancient fragments from lost worlds, Jedi diaries, Sith sermons, forgotten philosophies, and simply said, "You may see something I cannot." And Kyel would. Often. They debated without malice, questioned without venom. Malvex, for all his darkness, had begun to allow himself the dangerous act of listening, not as a master correcting, but as a man learning. And Kyel began to imagine a future, not of rule, not of revolution, but of revelation. Still, Kyel knew this could not last. He had forged his blade, his philosophy, his direction. But purpose does not live in isolation, and truth, once discovered, demands to be tested. Malachor had been a crucible, but crucibles are not homes. They are for forging what must one day leave them. That evening, as the red sun dipped low behind the broken teeth of Malachor's cliffs, Kyel left the spire's towers behind and wandered into the ruins that lay beyond the outer ridges. Malachor's surface was a graveyard of ancient wars. Towering monoliths collapsed under their own pride. half-buried ziggurats where long-dead warlords had once preached fury to blood-drunk followers. Trenches carved by orbital strikes, now flooded with stagnant ash. The wind screamed between jagged rocks like the ghosts of fallen Sith still clawed at the sky. Kyel walked slowly, not out of caution, but reverence. He found a broken altar at the edge of a cliff overlooking the chasm of lost duels. Moss had long since died upon it. The stone was cracked, scorched by lightning, but stable. A single tree, twisted and leafless, leaned over the ruin as if keeping vigil through centuries of silence. He climbed the altar's steps and sat, crossed his legs, placed his saber beside him, and let his mind fall into stillness. The force moved differently here, not in clear lines or currents, but in broken memories, flickers of agony, triumph, despair. Echoes of choices made in fear, dreams drowned in fire. Not hostile, but demanding. It asked who he was, what he carried, what he would leave behind. Kyel breathed. "I am not your servant," he whispered to the wind. "Nor your master." He closed his eyes. "I am the choice between." The air grew colder. A pressure mounted in the sky, as if the planet itself held its breath. He did not resist it. He opened himself to the echoes, to the old rage and broken wills buried beneath Malakor's soil. The regrets of Sith who died believing power was all that mattered. The grief of Jedi who perished hoping order alone could heal chaos. He felt them and offered them stillness. Not domination, not forgiveness, only recognition. One by one, the echoes faded, not defeated, acknowledged, honored. Kyel sat there long after the stars rose, after the twin moons emerged through clouds of ash. His saber remained unlit beside him, his presence quiet but unmoved. Not a Sith, not a Jedi, only Kyel, a bridge between creeds. A question yet to be answered. And for the first time in his life, the Force answered not with a whisper of command, but with the softest, clearest thought. "You are ready."